Well, let's take you back to one of our top stories for tonight, the focus being on the release of the 2020 matric results. The Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, is joining me now. Minister Motshekga, good evening, and I certainly hope that the connection this time around is much better. I was saying that in your speech earlier on today, you say that if there was no COVID-19, the class of 2020 would have possibly been the best matric results on the best class on record. Why do you say that?
Now the class, even when we do comparisons of internal grades, it was a very strong cohort, because we looked at their grade 11, grade 10, grade 9. They really were a very strong cohort of learners. They've had almost full CAPS curriculum, so a very stable schooling for the past 12 years. So they were a very strong cohort, even when we look at their other results for the lower grades. So, and that's why I think they could even hold their own in such a very difficult environment.
Overall, you seem quite pleased with the result. What did it take for you and your officials in order to get here today?
I won't say please. I mean, a drop can't please you. You would expect, and you would have wished for more. But I'm saying, under the circumstances, with the difficulties we had to confront, having lost an entire term. I mean, the second term is the most productive term in our system, and we lost that term between March and June. Even when we tried hard, we couldn't make up for the time lost. So I would have wished for more, but under the circumstances, I can't complain. It was a very difficult year.
Minister, when we compare the best performing province, which is the Free State, versus the Northern Cape, which is so far the lowest performing provinces, the difference between the averages and the numbers is about 20% of a pass rate. What does that tell you about just the state of inequality in the system?
It takes time to build performance in a province. And Free State, for years, building from their districts, there have been a system which has been on the rise throughout the years. So it didn't happen overnight. And you look at Northern Cape, especially JTC Daulo, they've had lots of difficulties. In the Free State, even when they have public disturbances, they've not been as severe as you will find them in Northwest, as severe as you would have found them in the JTC area. So public disturbances also tend to affect our schooling, because when people don't get a road, they go into schools. When they feel angry or frustrated, they destroy schools. And Free State has been building their system over a long period of time, and that's why they are such a resilient province.
When you apply that reasoning, Minister, to the results of the Northern Cape, does it make sense that that province has produced the kind of results that it has this time around?
No, it doesn't. That's why I say I'm going to work close with the MEC to further unpack what would have happened that would give them a drop of 10% and more. I didn't expect that from the Northern Cape. It's not something I expected from any other province. I mean, for instance, the Eastern Cape was on the rise. Yes, they still remain number 7, but again, to have such a big drop of more than 8% is huge. So we still have to go back to the provinces that, in addition to COVID-19, what else could they have done better to perform better? Because, as you correctly say, the drops are just too huge. Look at KZN, it's a very big province with a very difficult terrain, but they've done very well comparatively. They just had a drop of 3.4 or 3.7, so which really would have been understandable in the context of KZN being a big province with a very difficult terrain.
Minister, resources have been pointed to as one of the biggest challenges that faced schools last year, especially those that were unable to have lessons online. It required a lot of extra teaching from teachers and, of course, pupils to attend school at very different hours of the day. When you look at these results, do you think they speak to some of the inequality that lies in the country, especially between your urban and your rural areas?
The resources are an ongoing problem in the sector that we can't deny, but also lots of resources, because of the challenges of 2020, were poured into the system. We had more broadcasts, even on radio elsewhere. We had broadcasts on TV. We already had lots and lots of support for the first time. And that's why I say 2020, with all the difficulties, it has enriched the sector because it brought all sorts of resources. Even volunteers in those rural areas, professionals went out of their way to go and assist them. And that's why you will even find some very deep rural schools. I mean, Waterberg is not an urban province. It's a very poor district. But I tell you, the district director, when I visited her last year, she was saying, Minister, I am fighting tooth and nail to be a leading district. So quite a number of factors contribute towards success. Really hard work from officials, from teachers, but you're quite correct that where you have disparities in terms of resources, you have different outcomes. But it will be difficult to say in 2020, for instance, in Limpopo, it would have been resources. Waterberg is not very different from Sekhukhune. Generally, it's a very poor district, but their performance, that's systemic, they're just habitual underperformance. So we should look at all the different things that would have contributed. Vembe is just equally poor, but it performs better than Sekhukhune. So yes, resources are a problem, and it would be good if we would have had resources to support all learners. But as I'm saying, there are other factors also which really cause or result in underperformance.
Minister, you've also made a distinction between your fee-paying schools, your non-fee-paying schools, and the schools that are subsidized by government, and you're studying what the different results are saying. What are you hoping to do with this information? How is it going to inform policy within the education department going forward?
No, we've dedicated lots of resources to support your poor schools. There are no fee-paying schools. Parents don't pay. They get free transport. Some of the house schools have school feeding. So we have to monitor government resources to say where we have poured lots of resources, does it make any difference? So it's to really check if the policies, the pro-poor package that we've put in these schools, does it really make any difference in their performance? Does it add value? What more should we do in terms of monitoring the support that government gives to schools? In that process, we even monitor, and which is what I hope to discuss with the Minister of Social Development, that we have more learners who are still on social grants and they're passing more, and learners who are no longer on social grants. There could be different reasons. It could be that those learners who were in social grants are no longer receiving social grants. Maybe they are older learners, that's why they're not performing better. So we'll have to use different instruments to understand why learners who are still on social grant why are they performing better than those who are not social grant. It could inform government policy to say, as long as children are at school, the social grant should continue. So it's to really monitor how this poor package that we've put in place in government, if it's making any difference, if we have to improve more or get government to invest more resources in terms of supporting learners who are in need of support, psychosocial support in their education. So we're monitoring policy. It's not that we want to achieve anything different except for getting to understand how the poor package is performing and what more can be done to support learners who come from from your no-fee paying schools.
Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga. Minister, I'm going to ask you just to hang 10 for me. I just have a couple of more questions that I'd like to put to you just on the issue of this year's matric results. She, of course, making the announcement earlier on in the evening, giving us the pass rate for the matric class of 2020, 76.2%. It is a drop of 5% from the previous year, but of course, the class of 2020 working under the most difficult of conditions in the midst of a global pandemic, and so they have literally had to brave the storm in order to put up the kind of results that they have. We'll continue with the minister after this. All right, so we continue then speaking to Minister Angie Motshekga. She's the Basic Education Minister on this year's matric results. Minister, let me thank you so much for, indulging us and for staying on a bit longer. I wanted to ask about the issue of progressed learners, because there's an emphasis on progressed learners and how you've done the numbers and the calculations for the results this year. What is the criteria that is used to determine which learner is progressed to the next grade?
Those will be learners that would have failed grade 11 in terms of your progression rules. So, for instance, to be progressed from grade 11 to 12, you must pass a number of subjects, and so that will be one of the criteria. But it could be also learners that would have failed a phase more than twice, which means they are going to become overaged and discouraged from coming to school, because if a learner fails grade 11 twice, the likelihood that they'll drop out. So it will be mainly your learners that will not have qualified to go to grade 12. So in the previous years, what we will do is to give them multi-opportunities of writing exams, to say, year one, write 3 of the subjects so that you can focus on the 3, year 2, write the other 3 subjects. So we'll give them multiple opportunities of exams. But we will also give them additional support, because they would have been identified as learners who had not passed grade 12 in terms of our progression rules or progression guidelines. So these will be learners that really need additional support as compared to other learners who would have just passed from grade 11 to grade 12, qualifying or satisfying all the requirements for them to go to grade 12. So that's the criteria.
Are you finding that their results are competitive? Because often when you talk about what the average would have looked like without the addition of the progress learners, those averages increase by about 5 or 6% in some instances.
Yeah, and this side was worse because we didn't have the opportunity to put them inside and give them additional support. In the other years, what would have happened, we would have been able to give them additional support. But what we also realized, because we're experimenting with the program, when you give them multiple opportunities, sometimes they don't come back for the 2 outstanding subjects. That's why we changed the rules to say, if we progress you, go to grade 12, you're going to sit for all 6 subjects. So again, it's to use different opportunities to discourage them from leaving school, but also give them added support. You could see, say, despite the fact that some of them would not have passed grade 11 in their own right, some of them gave us distinctions, some of them got bachelors. So which means with motivation, with additional support, they're able to do well. But as I say, these are your weaker students. So they are likely to dilute the performance of learners who would have passed on their own to the next grade.
All right, Minister,
so
unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, she's responding then to the release of the matric results and I suppose reflecting also on the class of 2020 and how they have fared. Now, the Western Cape Education Department is